Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, the story of Shaina Hansye, a 15-year-old French girl who was stabbed and burned alive and whose tragic death has sparked a national debate. The trial of a man accused of her killing is now underway here in France. And the book that got Africa talking, The Sex Lives of African Women, has now been distributed in more than 100 countries, and its author, Darkoa Sekyiamah, is my guest this week. Also, reclaiming the streets, this time with street art, the push by French female artists to ensure they get their fair share of space for their work. But first, here in France, a trial has got underway with a man facing accusations of stabbing and burning alive a 15-year-old girl who was most likely pregnant by him at the time. The 2019 killing of Shaina Hansye has amplified concerns over the numbers of women murdered by their partners. In 2021, the number of femicides increased by 20% in France compared to the previous year, with 122 women being killed by their partner or ex-partner. Jenny Shin has more.
Her family and friends say she was a bright young girl with a radiant smile. On the 27th of October 2019, Shaina Hansye was found dead in the town of Creil, north of Paris, stabbed and burned. A brutal and tragic end to the sexual assault and harassment she suffered for 2 years. It began with a romantic relationship in the summer of 2017, during which Shaina's then-boyfriend asked her to share intimate photos, a decision that would quickly turn into a nightmare. She was blackmailed into coming to this abandoned clinic in exchange for deleting the photos. There, she was raped by several boys who filmed their assault. The video started circulating around the neighborhood, and rumors of her reputation began to fester. When she went to the police to file a complaint, her word was questioned, as she is said to have shown no sign of trauma.
It's a common mistake to believe that a victim should be screaming and shouting, when actually the victim can be silent as they're in shock. This is important to remember. There is no certain way that a victim should behave. Everyone reacts differently to situations.
From that moment on, Shaina became a regular target, harassed and mocked by her peers. After encountering her ex-boyfriend again in 2019, she filed a new complaint, this time for being beaten. Abuse that would last several months. But things took a turn for the worse when she became pregnant by her new boyfriend. He refused to take responsibility for his relationship with Shaina. He asked her to meet her in this shed, where he's accused of stabbing and burning her alive. Shaina's family says rumors played a pivotal part in her murder.
What Shaina endured was both moral and physical abuse. This gave ideas to the alleged murderer, and he took advantage. And this ultimately led to her murder.
The alleged perpetrator has been arrested and placed in custody. He disputes the charges and claims his innocence. If the charge of premeditation is upheld, the accused faces life imprisonment.
A story that has indeed captured the headlines here in France. Now, the title is certainly eye-catching. The Sex Lives of African Women by Darkoa Sekyiamah, a Ghanaian feminist and writer, was first published in 2021. Since then, it's been distributed in more than 100 countries. The book is a collection of 32 first-person accounts, including Sekyiamah's own, with African women talking openly about anything from sex in a polygamous marriage, exploring the world of swingers, through to being queer or opting for celibacy. And Nana now joins me from Tamar in Ghana. Thank you so much for your time. We women talk about sex among ourselves much more often than society gives us credit for. But was it difficult to get African women to open up to you, especially since so many African cultures are incredibly traditional about female sexuality?
I'm quite lucky. It was relatively easy to get women to open up to me about their deepest intimate experiences because I have been blogging about sex and sexualities since 2009. when I started my blog, Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. And so when I decided to write a book about women's sexual experiences, I feel like a number of people knew of me or knew of my reputation or could go online and find, articles that written about sex and sexuality and knew I was the kind of open-minded, non-judgmental person that they could really be themselves with. And I think that helped a lot.
There are so many stereotypes surrounding African women when it comes to sexuality. You have female genital mutilation, forced child marriage, domestic violence. Yet your book challenges all of these and more. Instead, the women interviewed are incredibly confident and very much wanting to explore their sexuality. But I want to ask you, who did you pick and are they truly representative?
It's a great question. Well, first of all, I went for as much diversity as possible. Initially, I had quite a utopian goal. I wanted to interview an African woman from every country on the continent, a goal that I quickly realized was unrealistic when the number of countries on the continent itself increases. And so I decided to just interview as many women as I could reach. I did call-outs on social media, via Twitter, on my blog. I told friends about my book. They introduced me to, some people even introduced me to their neighbors. A friend of mine had a neighbor who was a dominatrix, so she introduced her to me, and her story was Miss Deviant's story in the book. So I really just took advantage of whatever spaces I found myself in. And so, of course, some of the women also reflect the spaces that I find myself in, right? Because I find myself mainly in cities in different African countries. So a lot of women are from cities in African countries as opposed to maybe smaller villages that I wouldn't have visited.
In your opinion, what does your book say about sexuality among African women?
I think what it says about sexuality amongst African women is that our sexuality is on a spectrum and it's diverse and it's not fixed, and we're experimenting and we're trying to figure out who we are. And there are a couple of unicorns who have found the magic code and are living their best sex lives. And at the same time, we have also experienced trauma. We've experienced sexual assault. I don't think it's unique to us as African women. Even the story you reported just before this shows, that there is a lot of violence that we face just as a result of our gender. But we also experience pleasure and joy. And for me, what is most important is we are taking control over our sexual lives.
Now, the book has been a tremendous success. Were you surprised at the reaction?
I think when you're writing a book, you don't really think of the reaction. You just want to get it done. You have this goal. And so for me, the reaction has been heartwarming. Part of what has brought me the most joy is especially young queer people saying to me, "Thank you, I have never felt so seen in my life." I think it's important to feel seen. And so to have a book that has made people feel seen has really meant the world to me.
And as we've reported on this show before, a wave of anti-gay sentiment is sweeping across the African continent, including Ghana, where there's proposed legislation that would fully criminalise LGBTQ+ people. As a queer writer talking about female sexuality, that must make your life difficult, to say the least.
Yes, it is stressful to think that my own country could say it is illegal for me to exist. It is illegal for me to do the kind of work that I do. It is illegal for me to share stories that show the truth of our sexual experiences. At the same time, I think it's important to keep telling these stories to show that queer people have always existed. Homophobia is, I think, new, but I don't think queerness is new. We know the context for homosexuality on the African continent. At least in my country, it came through Victorian era laws and, British colonization. And it's really ironic that people are, pushing for this in this day and age.
Despite all of this, Nana, are you hopeful that the taboos surrounding female sexuality are slowly but surely being broken down?
I think what I feel hopeful about is women themselves taking charge of their own sexuality, letting go of age-old scripts around morality, and being brave and experimenting and figuring out ways to live outside of the box. I feel hopeful and women doing it for themselves and in finding community.
Nana, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette.
In France, just 6% of the country's streets are in fact named after women, despite how much they have shaped French society. And on the streets themselves, women artists are also struggling to claim a fair share of the public space, as Marion Laurie, Elodie Redemac and Andrew Hillier report.
I'm preparing the stencils that I'm going to put on the wall. I painted them at home with a spray, so I only have to place them.
Carol B has been a street artist since 2018. She draws her inspiration from pop culture icons.
By putting women's portraits in the streets, I make them visible and I try to inspire more women. The streets are often described as unsafe by most women, but it's also a place where they can express themselves freely.
Some of the artists we're going to see today are women, but don't necessarily call themselves feminists.
Feminists in the City organises tours in Paris to shed light on female street artists.
Street art is a political art, and women in the streets do something political. It's a kind of feminism.
This is the work of Mystic, one of the street artists who opened the door for a generation of others. She painted the walls of Paris in the 1980s. Mystic gained notoriety before her death in 2022, but other artists like her are still fighting to be recognised by the mainstream art community.
Even though more women than men study art in university, men are the ones who manage to get their art exhibited and make a living from it. We have the same phenomenon in street art, but with about 30% women street artists. It's changed a little now, especially with the COVID lockdown. Women have been taking a bigger part in the public space, especially through street art.
Although attitudes are slowly changing, street art by women is still regularly defaced. It means women are still having to fight for their share of the public space, one painting at a time.
And that's all for this edition. We'd love to hear your suggestions for the 51%, so do get in touch via Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. And you can catch our previous episodes on our website. So until our next show, bye for now.